I found a tube of personal lubricant in my husband's car. I didn't say a word. I just secretly replaced it with an industrial superglue. And what happened next sent my husband and his secret lover straight to the emergency room and exposed their affair in the most humiliating way imaginable. Hello, my amazing viewers. I am so glad you are here. If you are watching this video, please like and subscribe to my channel and tell me in the comments where you are listening to my story of revenge from. I want to know how far this story has traveled. My name is Ruth Bernard, and I had been married for 35 years before I discovered that he was cheating on me with the person I least expected. On that fateful night, my husband Bernard came home late from a business dinner. At least, that is what he had told me that morning before he left. He said it the way he'd been saying everything lately, quick and distracted, his eyes fixed on his phone, already halfway out the door before the conversation even began. I've got a dinner meeting with a client in New York. Don't wait up. Another dinner. Another meeting. Another excuse. He leaned in, brushed a kiss against my cheek, grabbed his jacket from the hook, and walked out before I could ask a single question. I had stood at the kitchen window and watched his car back out of the driveway, and then I turned and went about my day the way I always did. I opened my catering business by 7, managed orders, coordinated with suppliers, and came home in the early evening to a house that had grown unbearably quiet. No conversation, no laughter, just the quiet hum of appliances and the ticking of the clock on the wall. And Bernard, he was always at a meeting, always with clients, always somewhere else. By 10 p.m. that night, I was still at the kitchen table, not because I had anything left to do, but because sitting there felt better than lying in that big bed alone. The cup of chamomile tea in front of me had gone cold a long time ago. I hadn't touched it in over an hour. I was just sitting, waiting patiently for him to return home. I was beginning to suspect that this beautiful, meticulous marriage we had was a crafted lie. The old wall clock above the stove kept steady time. My mother had given it to us the year we moved into this house, back when everything about our life together still felt new and full of promise. She was gone 5 years later, and I could never bring myself to take that clock down. It had outlasted so many things. That night it ticked the way it always did, slow and even, but something about the sound of it felt different. Like it was marking something. Like it knew what would happen next. I heard his car pull in just after 10:30. He came through the front door, looking like a man who had been carrying something heavy for a long time and was no longer doing a good job of hiding it. His shoulders were drawn in. His eyes were distant in the particular way they had been getting. Not the tiredness of a man who worked hard, but something else entirely, something that sat deeper and darker behind the tiredness. He loosened his tie the moment he stepped inside, pulling at it like it was suffocating him, and dropped his jacket over the back of the sofa without breaking stride. His expensive cologne filled the air, but there was another smell mixed with it, a sweet floral perfume that didn't belong in our home. It felt out of place, like a quiet hint that there was a part of his life I didn't know about. "You're still up?" he asked, glancing at me. "Yes, I was waiting for you," I replied. "How was the dinner in New York?" He paused for just a fraction of a second. "Long," he said. "Tiring. These partners drag everything out." He rolled his neck, rubbing the back of it with one hand, and then he continued, "I'm going to jump in the shower. I'm exhausted." And just like that, the conversation was over. He didn't ask about my day. He didn't ask if I was fine, or even thank me for waiting up for him. He just moved down the hallway, and I heard the bathroom door click shut, followed by the soft groan of the pipes as the water came on. I stayed a little longer at the table, listening to the shower, and something about the way he had answered me lingered in my mind. Not exactly wrong, but too smooth, too practiced, like a man who had rehearsed every word on the drive home. I had been married to Bernard for over 30 years. I knew the difference between a tired husband and a careful one. I also knew him well enough to know he never cared much about hygiene. He had often taken his bath once a day and never thought twice about bathing again whenever he got home from work. Yet now, here he was, jumping straight into the bathroom the second he stepped through the door. That alone told me something was off. And I know something else too, something most men never truly understand. A woman can tell when her husband is hiding something. After a while, I pushed my chair back, stood up from the kitchen table, and walked into the living room. I began straightening things the way I always did. It was something I had done every night for as long as I could remember, gathering up whatever trail he had left behind him. I moved his shoes aside, straightened the cushions, and folded the throw blanket neatly back into place. I picked up his wallet from the side table, his keys, and his phone. The phone screen was still on, glowing softly in the dim room. I glanced at it the way you glance at anything sitting directly in front of you, without any real intention behind it. There was an email on the screen. I frowned. Bernard did not use email. It had always been a joke between us over the years. He was the last person in his office to get a smartphone, the last to understand why anyone would communicate by writing an email when a phone call took 30 seconds. Anytime I tease him for not using an email, he will say, "Ruth, all this tech stuff is too complicated and stressful. I would rather just make a call. Email is for people with too much to say, but not enough courage to say it out loud." I used to find it funny, but now, standing there and looking at his phone, seeing that he had been using email without my knowledge, and noticing that there was a new message sitting right there on the screen, made me stop abruptly. I picked up the phone, my hands trembling slightly. The email preview stared back at me. Innocuous at first glance, just a few words glowing on the screen. But those words carried a weight that made my chest tighten. A part of me wanted to look away, to pretend I hadn't seen it. But another part, the part that had been waiting for the truth for weeks, forced my fingers to swipe open the message. And then I read it. "You were so amazing tonight, Dad. I enjoyed it." It was followed by a red heart, a symbol of affection that pierced my own heart with a cold, sharp ache. I froze as if someone had slapped me. I read it once, then again, then a third time, as if the words might rearrange themselves into something that made a different kind of sense. Dad. Someone was calling my husband Dad, not in the plain, matter-of-fact way a child addresses a father. No, there was a warmth in it, an intimacy, something that felt private and practiced, like a name used between two people who had developed their own love language. My heart beat faster as I scrolled down, looking for more context. There was nothing below it, just that one line, that one red heart, and a sending address that was a random string of letters and numbers, the kind you create when you don't want anyone to know who you are. I put the phone back, exactly where I had found it, screen down, and then I picked up his dirty clothes from the sofa to take them to the laundry. I checked the pockets out of pure habit, the way I always did before taking anything to the laundry. The right outer pocket was empty. The left outer pocket had a gas station receipt, a couple of coins, and a folded piece of gum wrapper. I moved to the inner breast pocket, and I felt a folded piece of paper, crisp and new. I pulled it out. It was a receipt, folded neatly into thirds. I carried it to the lamp and opened it. It was a receipt from a fancy steakhouse in Boston, dated that very night. The restaurant was called Oleander. I frowned. Boston? He had told me he was meeting his partners in New York. A tiny bitter laugh escaped my lips. Bernard hated driving to New York. Boston, on the other hand, was where Bernard had gone to college. He talked about it, sometimes fondly, the way people talk about places that shaped them. He knew the streets there. He knew which restaurants were good. He would have known exactly where to take someone for a quiet, private dinner. But who had he had dinner with in Boston while lying to me about being in New York? The receipt showed a table for two, a bottle of Chateau Margaux, a wine I recognized immediately because Bernard had ordered the same one the night we celebrated my catering business getting its first hotel contract 8 years ago. He had made a small toast that night, just the two of us, and told me I had built something worth being proud of. I had thought about that night many times since. Now I was holding a receipt that carried the same wine into a completely different story. Main courses for two. A shared dessert. Dinner for two in Boston, when he had told me he was in New York. I took out my phone and quietly took photos of the receipt and the email. I didn't want to see what they meant, but after 35 years of being a wife, there's a kind of instinct you can't ignore. Something was happening, and I needed to know what. I had trusted this man with my life for 35 years, built a home with him, built a history, and now I was sitting in my own kitchen, holding proof that there was a part of his life I had never been invited into. My hands shook, not just with anger, but with a hollow, sinking fear, like standing at the edge of a cliff and realizing everything I thought I knew might fall away all at once. And then I turned toward the door. Because if Bernard had gone to Boston, there would be something else. There is always something else. Men who lie rarely stop at one lie. I reached for his car keys without hesitation and stepped out into the garage. The air was cool and still, carrying the faint smell of concrete and gasoline. Bernard's car sat in the dim light, the engine ticking softly as it cooled. For a moment, I just stood there, staring at it. 35 years of marriage. And somehow it had come to this, me standing in the dark, preparing to search my husband's car, like a stranger. I opened the driver's side door. The interior light flickered on, soft and yellow. Everything looked normal. A water bottle in the cup holder, a pair of sunglasses. Nothing out of place. I leaned in and started checking carefully. The side compartments, the center console. There was nothing unusual, just a few coins and an old receipt from a grocery run he'd made the week before. Then I reached for the glove compartment. My fingers paused for just a second before I opened it. Inside were the usual things: registration papers, an old insurance card, and a pack of tissues. Tucked slightly behind them was something small. I pulled it out slowly. It was a slender, metallic silver tube with a thin gold stripe running along one side. The cap had a faint residue around the edges, the kind that comes from constant usage. The label was printed in small, precise Chinese characters. I understand and read Mandarin. My grandmother had taught me as a child, and though I hadn't used it regularly in many years, it came back to me immediately and completely the way old knowledge always does when something calls it forward. I tilted the tube toward the lamplight and read every word carefully. It was a premium men's personal lubricant, imported. The brand name translated roughly to something like Silk Evening. It was the kind of product you would not find at a regular pharmacy. The packaging was too refined and the product too specific for intimacy. Bernard and I had not been intimate in years. He always had a reason. He always said he was tired and exhausted. That age had sapped his desire. So, what was this lubricant for? Who had he been with, and how long had this been going on? The questions came one after the other, each one hitting harder than the last. I felt paralyzed but kept a clear head, a survival instinct kicking in. I placed the tube back, exactly where I had found it, tucking it behind the papers, aligning everything the way it had been. I made sure that there was no sign it had ever been touched. Then I reached for a napkin and wiped my hands. Once, twice, harder than necessary, as if I could scrub the feeling of his betrayal off my skin, as if touching the lubricant had left something behind. I leaned back into the car and kept searching, slower this time, more deliberate, not guessing anymore. Looking under the back seat, my fingers brushed against something soft. I pulled it out. It was a silk scarf, crumpled and half hidden beneath the seat. It wasn't mine. I picked it up. The fabric was soft and expensive, and it carried a scent that didn't belong in my life. Not my light rose perfume. This was different, warmer, sweeter, something like amber and vanilla, lingering in a way that felt too intimate, too present. I held it for a second longer than I should have, then dropped it back into my palm like it had burned me. There was no explaining it away now. I took out my phone and snapped pictures. The glove compartment, the tube, the scarf, every detail, as if capturing it would make it real, as if I would need proof later that I hadn't imagined any of this, because deep down, I already knew beyond every reasonable doubt that my husband was cheating, even though I don't know who he was cheating on me with yet. But I will find out. I stepped back out of the car and closed the door. By the time I walked back into the house, the shower had turned off, and Bernard had gone to bed. I could hear the slow, even rhythm of his breathing from down the hall, that deep, unbothered sleep of a man with no apparent trouble in the world. I picked up his phone again and went through the messages carefully. They were ordinary work threads, a few exchanges with his brother and sister, and a group chat with some old friends. Nothing that stood out. His inbox was almost empty. His sent folder had almost nothing in it. Everything was neat, cleared, and wiped clean to avoid suspicion. No one lives like that. No one keeps a phone that empty unless they are hiding something. It was very obvious that he had erased every trace of his deception to make sure there was nothing left for me to find. I set the phone down. I did not cry that night. I did not wake him up and demand answers. I did not do any of the things a woman in a film might do at that moment. I just sat there in my kitchen, in the quiet, and began thinking about what to do next. I had seen enough to know that the life I thought I was living and the life that was actually happening around me were two very different things, and enough to know that whatever came next, I was not going to face it as a fool. I was boiling with rage, a hard stone in my chest, and a new, more dangerous emotion began to stir within me, a desire for truth, a need to expose the lie, no matter the cost. That night, I did not sleep. I lay down on the bed for the entire night, listening to Bernard breathe beside me, slow, deep, completely unbothered, like he had nothing to hide, and I stared at the ceiling until the darkness began to soften at the edges, and the first pale light of morning crept through the curtains like something reluctant and ashamed. My eyes were dry. My body was still, but my mind had not stopped moving for a single second. I kept thinking about everything I had discovered that night. The email, the receipt, the lubricant, and the scarf that bears the scent of another woman. I turned each piece over and over in the dark, the way you press a bruise to make sure it is real. The way you return to a wound is not because you want to hurt yourself, but because some part of you still cannot believe it is there. But lying there and guessing wasn't going to get me anywhere. I needed evidence. I needed the truth, the full picture documented, and irrefutable, the kind of truth that cannot be reframed or explained away or managed by a man who has spent 35 years learning exactly how to manage me. And I could not get that on my own. I was a catering business owner, not an investigator. I knew how to plan an event for 300 people and negotiate a contract with a hotel and manage a kitchen staff of 12 under pressure. I did not know how to follow a man without being seen or record a conversation in a hotel car park or obtain phone records that told the story I needed told. I needed someone who did. By 5:30, I was in the kitchen with the first coffee of the morning, sitting at the table in the gray, early light. Bernard was still sleeping. I picked up my phone and called Margaret Osei. We had met 12 years ago, in the very early days of the catering business, when I was still operating out of a rented commercial kitchen with 2 part-time staff and an almost laughable optimism about how quickly things were going to grow. She had been the events coordinator at the Harrington Hotel downtown, a sharp, composed woman in her early 50s who had looked at my small operation and my nervous pitch and my folder of sample menus and had given me my first real hotel contract when she had no particular reason to. She said later that she had given it to me because I was the only caterer who had come to the meeting having already researched the hotel's existing menu and prepared suggestions for how mine would complement rather than duplicate it. She said it showed a quality of attention she found rare. We had stayed close in the years since, not in the daily way of close friends, but in the more durable way of women who respect each other, who show up when it matters, who have coffee twice a year and pick up exactly where they left off each time. She had been at the launch of my second kitchen. I had been at her daughter's graduation dinner. We were the kind of friends that life builds slowly. She had said something to me years ago, over coffee after a protracted and ugly situation with a supplier who had been systematically overbilling me for 8 months before I caught it. She had said, "Ruth, if you ever need a private investigator, someone to find out what someone is really doing, not what they're telling you, but what they're actually doing, I know a man who can do that effortlessly. His name is Peter. He's thorough, discreet, and reliable." She had written a number on a napkin and pushed it across to me. I had smiled, thanked her, and put the napkin inside my purse, but unfortunately when the purse was stolen, the napkin went with it. I never thought that I would ever need that number, especially in my marriage, but now I have no other choice because I need to know who my husband is having an affair with. I know Margaret would still have the number. I picked up my phone and pressed call. It rang 4 times. I had a moment of thinking she would not answer. It was early, not yet 6. Some persons would still be asleep. But fortunately for me, the line connected, and her voice came through, alert in the way of someone who wakes easily and is immediately present. Ruth. She didn't sound surprised. She sounded as if she had been half expecting my call. It's early. Are you all right? She asked. Margaret, I said, do you still have Peter's number? The investigator you mentioned years ago. She paused briefly, the pause of a woman who is recalibrating the nature of the call she has just received, who is understanding in that brief silence what a question like that means coming from a woman like me at this hour of the morning. I do, she said. Her voice was even and warm and entirely without the kind of probing or prying that would have made the moment harder. Can you send it to me? I said. I'm sorry for calling you at this early morning hour. Don't apologize, she said. I'll send it to you in the next 5 minutes. Thank you, I said, and my voice, to my mild surprise, was steady and calm. Ruth, she said, just before she hung up, whatever this is, you are going to handle it. You always do. And if you need anyone to talk to, just know that I am always available to listen. I did not answer that. I thanked her again and cut the call. I set the phone face down on the table and sat with both hands wrapped around my cold coffee mug and looked at the window where the morning was beginning properly now, the gray becoming lighter, the shapes of the garden becoming visible through the glass. 2 minutes later, my phone lit up with a message from Margaret. A name, Peter Hills. A phone number. And below it, 3 words that she had added without fanfare. Peter is good at what he does. I looked at the message for a moment. Then I saved the number. Then I sat at my kitchen table and waited for a reasonable hour to make the call. I needed to make the call when I was alone. Bernard came downstairs just after 7, dressed for work. He came into the kitchen looking composed, already wearing the expression of a man who had somewhere to be and no particular interest in the person he was leaving behind. He sat at the table and reached for his coffee. He took 1 sip, set it down half full, and picked up his phone, its screen tilted just slightly away from me. I have a meeting this morning, he said, not looking up. An important one. I'll probably be home late again. Again. I stood at the stove with my back to him and said, all right, be careful. I kept my voice exactly the temperature it had always been. Warm, easy, unhurried. The voice of a wife who has no reason to ask questions, who trusts the man at her kitchen table, who has spent 35 years building a life with him, and sees no cause for suspicion. I had been using that voice so long it had become second nature, like breathing, like walking. Now it felt like the most expensive performance I had ever given. He got up. He gave me a pat on the shoulder, that same flat, absent-minded pat, the kind you give a surface you pass rather than a person you love, and left without asking how I had slept, without asking about my day, and without taking his breakfast. The front door closed behind him. His car reversed out of the driveway. The sound of the engine faded down the street, and then the house was silent. I picked up my phone and called Peter twice. He didn't respond, so I left him a message. Peter replied within the hour and suggested we meet at noon. A place called Birchwood Cafe at the quieter end of the main street, the kind of small, unassuming establishment with worn wooden furniture and tables spaced far enough apart for a private conversation. I arrived 15 minutes early. I chose a corner seat with my back to the wall and the door in my line of sight, and I wrapped both hands around a coffee. I had no intention of drinking and sat very still while the cafe moved around me. The place smelled of roasted coffee and old wood and something faintly sweet, a baked good from earlier in the morning, already sold out and gone, leaving only the ghost of its scent in the warm air. Under any other circumstances, that smell would have relaxed me. That morning it just sat at the surface of my senses without penetrating anything underneath. I was too far inside myself for small comforts to reach. Peter arrived at noon exactly. He was a compact, unhurried man in his mid-50s with a light gray shirt and a plain watch and the particular quality of stillness that belongs to people who have learned that watching carefully is more useful than being noticed. He crossed the room, sat down across from me, and said my name without preamble. Mr. Peter, I said, thank you for coming. I had spent the previous evening preparing a flash drive. Photographs of the email I had seen in Bernard's phone, the restaurant receipt from Oleander in Boston, the silver tube I had found in his car, its Chinese label clear in the light, and the silk scarf that I found tucked under the car seat with a scent not mine. I arranged everything in order, noting the dates and times, and wrote a brief summary for each piece on a folded sheet of paper, which I tucked into the drive case. I did it with the same quiet, methodical focus I used when planning an event. Everything in place, everything accounted for. Nothing left to chance. I slid the flash drive across the table. Peter picked it up, connected it to his phone with a small adapter, and went through each image without expression. He made notes in a small notebook, precise, unhurried notes, the handwriting of a man who has done this many times and long ago stopped being surprised by what people bring him. He asked perhaps 4 questions: dates, locations, whether Bernard's schedule had shifted in the past several months, whether there had been anything else, anything at all, that had felt different before I found the evidence. I answered everything, clearly and completely. I think my husband is having an affair. I said, I need to know who it is, and I need to know everything. The words tasted like something metallic, like the inside of a mouth after a shock. 30 years of marriage, and here I was, sitting in the quiet corner of a cafe on a Tuesday morning, handing the evidence of my own marriage to a stranger. Peter closed his notebook. I'll begin this afternoon, he said. Don't change anything at home. Don't confront him. Don't do anything that would arouse suspicion. He looked at me steadily. Can you do that? Yes, I said, trying to hold back the tears that were burning my eyes. I just want to know the truth, whatever it may be. Please help me find out what my husband is hiding. Peter nodded with a compassionate look, a flicker of understanding in his eyes. Don't worry, I will do my best, he said. Just go home, and I will update you as soon as possible. The moment I stepped out of the cafe, a cold weight settled in my chest. Part of me wanted to scream. Another part of me wanted to collapse right there on the sidewalk and feel the pain of the betrayal. But I held myself. 30 years of marriage. And here I was, hiring a stranger to follow my own husband down the street. I had trusted him with everything, my heart, my life, my quiet routines, and never once imagined he could betray me like this. Each step that I took felt like a knife twisting in my chest. Each turn a reminder that the man I had spent decades loving was now a stranger carrying secrets I had no right to know. I felt small, hollowed out, like someone had reached inside me and stolen the part of myself that believed in us. Although I was broken and trembling, a part of me needed to see the truth, needed to know the depth of the life he had built behind my back. 2 days after I hired Peter, he called me to inform me that he had found answers to my husband's secret. He sent all the evidence of his investigation. Believe me when I say that what he discovered was so devastating that I almost had a heart attack. The first photograph was my husband Bernard. He was wearing his gray jacket, the one I had bought him 2 Christmases ago, the one he likes wearing often because I have told him countless times how handsome it makes him look. He was walking toward the entrance of a restaurant holding a young woman's hand, just the way couples hold each other's hands affectionately. And guess what? It was Sandra, my daughter-in-law, my son's wife, the girl I had welcomed into our family and treated her like my own child. The girl I had hugged tight on birthdays and milestones and even bought birthday gifts for. She was wearing the red gown that my son Marcus had gifted her last year on her 27th birthday. Her hair was loose in a way I had genuinely never seen at a family gathering. At our house, she always wore it neatly pulled back. But that night her hair was down, and she was leaning toward Bernard as they walked, and he was saying something to her that made her smile happily. I had never seen her smile like that. Not once. Not in all the time she had been coming to my home. But here she was smiling carelessly with Bernard. More photos and video arrived. The 2 of them were at a corner table with candles between them and a bottle of wine. I recognized the label immediately because it was the same wine Bernard had ordered at our 25th wedding anniversary. The same wine. His choice. I had kept the memory of that anniversary dinner for years because we created so many loving memories, and it made me feel like a teenager in love. It brought back so many sweet memories and promises we made to each other when we started our relationship as teenagers and even as newly married couples. Now, I was looking at that same wine in a photograph of my husband and my daughter-in-law at a candlelit table in a restaurant. He had taken her on a dinner date while I was at home cooking his meals and running the home front. The specific and deliberate cruelty of his betrayal made my chest burn. Sandra leaned close to his ear, whispering something that made him laugh so hard, unbothered that other people might be looking at him. It was not the social laugh I had heard from him at 1,000 family dinners. It was something looser and more genuine, the laugh of a man who is fully, completely comfortable with the woman in his company. And the way he looked at her, with so much tenderness and admiration. That was the thing that finished me. Not the restaurant, not the wine, not even the closeness of them together. His face, the expression on it as he looked at her. It was not the flushed, temporary brightness of something illicit or exciting. It was something quieter and more permanent than that. The look of a man who is exactly where he wants to be. In 35 years of marriage, I had never seen him look at me like that, not like this. When we were young, when I was that bright-eyed girl from California, with flowing hair and a radiant smile, he had looked at me with genuine adoration, a love I believed was only mine. But now, that look, that warmth, that spark of devotion, it wasn't for me, it was for her. And the realization stabbed through me with a pain I had never imagined. Then Bernard said something that made my heart tumble. He said, "You make me feel young and lively, Sandra, not like that old hag who called herself my wife." Sandra laughed hard and said, "You are funny, Daddy." She's truly an old hag. That was the moment something inside me cracked in a way I knew would never fully heal. I replayed that video over and over again, a self-inflicted torture. Each time felt like another stab to the heart. At a point, they got up and left, and Bernard, the ever-gentleman, opened the car door for her. She put her hands around his neck and kissed him deeply before sitting proudly in the front of the car. My heart broke 100 times, and I felt a teardrop from my eyes. I never knew that this was just the tip of the iceberg, and the main heartbreak was yet to come, because what Peter discovered next was far more brutal than anything I could have imagined. A cruelty so calculated, so cold, I could hardly believe that a father could have the mind to hurt both his son and his wife. It was so cruel that when Peter called me to tell me about it, he said, "Mrs. Crawford, I have something significant to tell you. I want you to hold yourself because what you are about to hear might shatter you even more." The affair did not start recently. This has been going on for considerably longer than the past several months. He paused briefly, then he continued, "Mrs. Crawford, I believe this affair began before your son married her." The words hit me like ice. Before the wedding, I repeated them silently, letting them scrape along every nerve. Yes, Peter anticipating my thought. From what I have been able to establish, phone records, receipts going back several years, and a recorded conversation. They were involved before your son began dating her. It appears she began the relationship with your son while already involved with your husband. He paused. It appears the marriage to your son was not unrelated to maintaining access to your husband. I stood in my kitchen, but this time I had to sit because my feet were almost giving way. She had not started this affair with my husband by mistake. She had not been swept into something she did not fully understand. She had walked into my family with her eyes open and a calculation already made. She did not care to think about the pain this would bring to my home if it ever gets discovered. Rather, she decided that the safest place to be was inside the family itself. And my son had been the door she walked through to get there. I thought about Bernard at family gatherings, his studied, convincing irritation with her, the mild dismissiveness whenever I praised her or mentioned something kind she had done. He performed it so naturally, so consistently, that it had never once occurred to me to question it. I don't know what Marcus sees in her, If I'm honest, there are other better and more beautiful girls out there. He would say at the dinner table, lightly, with that practiced impatience of a man who simply cannot warm to his daughter-in-law no matter how hard he tries. Not unkind exactly, not dramatic, just a father-in-law who never quite connected with his son's wife and had made a quiet peace with that fact. And Marcus, my son, who had always said to me with a small, helpless laugh, "Dad just doesn't like her, Mom. I don't know why. Maybe he'll come around." And I had told him to be patient. I had told him that Bernard took time with people, that it was not personal, that it would improve with time. I had made excuses for a performance I never knew was a cover-up for an illicit affair between a father-in-law and his daughter-in-law. I had spent energy managing my son's feelings about his father's manufactured dislike of the woman he was sleeping with, while he was sleeping with her, while she had agreed to marry my son in order to remain close to his father. "Mrs. Crawford," Peter said again, his voice pulling me back, "there is something else. Something that goes beyond the affair and beyond the marriage. Something about how your son and Sandra came to meet in the first place." I said nothing. I held the phone and waited because there is more information to come. From the recorded conversation I obtained between your husband and Sandra, Peter said, "It is clear that the meeting between your son and Sandra was not accidental. It was not a coincidence of social circles or two young people finding each other naturally. Your husband arranged it. He put them in the same room deliberately in a way that would look entirely natural to everyone involved, including your son and including you. Neither of you was supposed to know, and neither of you did." I felt as though the whole world had become completely still. I thought about the story Marcus had told me. He had come to the catering kitchen on a Tuesday afternoon. I remembered it clearly, the way you only remember ordinary moments once they have been given a meaning they did not originally carry. He had sat on the stool in the office the way he used to sit on the kitchen counter as a teenager when he had something on his mind and was not sure how to start. He had been trying not to make too much of it. He had said, "I met someone, Mom, at that networking dinner last month. We got talking and we exchanged numbers. I think I like her." A networking dinner. Bernard had taken Marcus to that dinner. He had mentioned it casually a few weeks before. "There's an industry event next month. You should come. It would be good for you to meet some people." Marcus had gone because his father suggested it, and Marcus trusted his father completely and had no reason not to. He had gone, and he had met a woman, and he had come home thinking it was one of those ordinary social accidents that sometimes lead somewhere meaningful. He had no idea his father had made sure Sandra was in that room. He had no idea the woman he met and liked and eventually fell in love with had been placed in his path deliberately by the same man who had been meeting her in hotel rooms for over a year. And I had heard the story the same way Marcus told it, as a coincidence, as one of those things that happen at social events. I had been happy for him. I had gone home that evening and told Bernard over dinner, "Marcus met someone at that networking event you took him to. He seems really taken with her." And Bernard had looked up from his plate and said, "Oh, really? Good for him." Not too enthusiastic, not performing with interest that might invite questions. Just a father receiving ordinary news about his son's social life in an ordinary, mildly pleased way. He had already known exactly who she was. He had put them in that room and then come home and sat across from me and eaten his dinner and said good for him and poured himself more wine and changed the subject. In the recorded conversation, Peter continued, "Sandra references the evening of the networking dinner directly. She says, and I am reading from the transcript, 'Remember how nervous I was that night. I almost didn't go.' Your husband responds, 'But you did. And it worked exactly the way we needed it to. It worked exactly the way we needed it to.' I stood on the back step of my catering kitchen and let those words move through me slowly. Not an accident, not a coincidence. A plan with a nervous moment, Sandra almost not going, and a confirmed outcome. It worked exactly the way we needed it to, and two people who had discussed it beforehand and were still referencing it years later in the casual shorthand of people who share something they have never had to hide from each other because they have always hidden it from everyone else. Mrs. Crawford, Peter said, I want to explain to you what I believe was the reason behind this arrangement, because it is important that you understand it fully. Go ahead, I said. The hotel meetings had become a problem. Peter said, too frequent, too expensive, too many chances of being seen by the wrong person at the wrong moment. Receipts, parking records. The risk was growing, and your husband knew it. He needed a way to keep Sandra close without any of the complications that came with meeting her outside the family. He paused. If Sandra became your son's wife, she would have a permanent, legitimate reason to be in your home, at your table, in your life. No hotels needed. No explanations required. No risk of a stranger recognizing them somewhere they should not have been together. She would simply be family. And family is the one relationship that nobody questions. I looked at the wall at the far end of the car park. So that was it. That was the reason my son had been handed a woman to fall in love with. Not because his father had thought of him. Not because his father had seen someone and genuinely believed she might make Marcus happy, but because the hotel rooms had become inconvenient, because the receipts were piling up, because Bernard had looked at the growing risk of his own exposure, and decided that the most efficient solution was to move Sandra inside the perimeter of the family itself, where her presence would be not just accepted but welcomed, where nobody would ever think to look twice at how much time she spent near his father-in-law because she was simply his son's wife. And that is what daughter-in-laws do. They become part of the family. They sit at the table, they show up at Christmas, and they call the mother-in-law Mom. He had looked at his son and seen a solution to a logistical problem. That was what Marcus had been. A solution. A convenient, trusting, entirely unsuspecting solution to the growing inconvenience of conducting an affair without getting caught. And then, after engineering the whole thing, after placing Sandra in that room and watching it work exactly the way they needed it to, after allowing our son to fall deeply in love with his mistress and marrying her, Bernard had the mind to pretend that he suddenly doesn't like her anymore after the marriage. He would always say, "What did Marcus see in her? There are other better girls out there." He said it directly to my face with that light, mild, entirely convincing impatience of a man who doesn't like his daughter-in-law. He said it so many times and so naturally that I believed him and built my understanding of his relationship with Sandra entirely around it. He had not just deceived me about the affair. He had decided in advance what I was going to think about it. He had delivered that version to me so consistently that I had never once suspected any foul play. I had been living inside his version of the story the entire time. And Marcus had been living inside it too, trusting his father and believing that the mild awkwardness between his father and his wife was just one of those family dynamics that never quite resolved. Never knowing that the awkwardness was a pretense. Never knowing that his father had put Sandra in his life, not out of love for his son, but out of love for his own comfort. My son, who had walked into that room and felt something real. That was the part that hurt me the most. They had played with my son's emotions and took it for granted. His feelings had been genuine. His love had been real. His investment in that marriage had been wholehearted and honest. He had been the only person in the entire arrangement who was not pretending. He had simply been used by the two people who should have been the last people on earth capable of using him. Mrs. Crawford, Peter said quietly, "Are you still there?" "Yes," I said. My voice was even, but the sadness in it cannot be hidden. "Are you all right?" Peter asked. I almost said yes, but then I said, "No, but I will be." He was quiet for a moment. Then, "I believe you." I thanked him and we ended the call. Bernard, my husband of 35 years, had not just decided to hurt me, but he had also planned with Sandra to make the pain deeper by hurting our son. I felt the anger of a mother rose inside me, and I decided there that I must get a revenge for myself and for my son. That evening Bernard came home late, as usual. I already knew that he was with Sandra, but I didn't say a word about it. I kept my face and voice neutral, welcomed him home, and served him dinner. I had made pasta. I watched him eat with the appetite of a man who has clear conscience, but deep down in his mind, believed that he had successfully managed the emotions of two women, with the legal wife been the oblivious one. When he finished, he gave me a quick kiss and said he loved me. I nodded slowly and told him that I love him too. He left and headed straight to the bedroom. He was obviously tired. I cleared the table with anger boiling in my chest. I wonder how cruel a man could be to the extent of disrespecting his wife by having an affair with his son's wife, telling her all the sweet nothings, and at the same time telling his wife that he loves her. By the time I finished clearing the table and washing the dishes, Bernard was already lying asleep on our bed. He left his car keys on the nightstand, gleaming under the dim light, a siren's call to my revenge. I stared at them, my heart pounding in my chest. This was my chance, my opportunity to do what I had decided to do. I entered the bedroom slowly, careful not to make a noise. Every step felt like walking between pain and resolve, between the past and a new, unknown future. I grabbed the keys, squeezed them tight, and went straight to the garage. The night was quiet, as if the world was holding its breath. All I could hear were crickets outside, their chirping a soundtrack to my silent fury. I turned on my phone's flashlight. The weak light illuminated Bernard's old SUV, a silent accomplice in his betrayal. I opened the door. The smell of gasoline was still there, mixed with a strange, sweet perfume. I opened the glove compartment between the seats, and there it was, the tube of lubricant with a loose cap and dried residue on the edge, a monument to their infidelity. I held it in my hand, feeling like I was holding a dirty secret. It was clear they had used it again, as if it were confirmation that Bernard and Sandra were still playing their secret game, their twisted little dance. I carried the tube to the kitchen counter. I set it directly under the light. I turned on the tap and washed my hands thoroughly with the lavender soap I kept by the basin, with the feeling that I am washing off every trace of my husband's infidelity. I dried my hands on a clean cloth. Then I opened the tool drawer. At the back, behind the spare batteries and the box of picture hooks and the small hammer I used for hanging frames, was a tube of clear industrial superglue. I had bought it 3 years ago to repair a set of ceramic display pieces at the catering kitchen, the heavy-duty variety, the kind that bonds on contact and sets within seconds and does not release without a solvent and significant effort. I lifted it out and set it on the counter beside the silver tube and looked at both of them for a moment under the bright kitchen light. One had been carried into my home in my husband's car, used against me without my knowledge by a man who was meant to protect our marital vows. The other was about to teach him a lesson that he would never forget all his lifetime. I emptied the silver tube completely, rinsing the interior carefully under the tap, drying it with a thin cloth until there was nothing left of what had been inside. Then, with the measured patience of a woman who had been taken for granted, I filled it with the industrial glue. I tapped it gently against the counter to settle the contents. I checked the weight in my hand, and it was close enough. I wiped the nozzle clean with a dry cloth and pressed the cap back into place firmly. I turned it over in the light, examined every surface. The gold stripe uninterrupted, the Chinese label unchanged. The cap looks clean, the residue on the edge exactly as it had been. At a glance, it was identical to what it had been before. There was absolutely no difference. I smiled faintly, though a hurricane was raging inside me. This wasn't a game. It was the first step to getting justice. I took the tube back to the garage and put it back in the glove compartment, adjusted the floor mat and the seat just as they were, as if no one had touched anything before closing the car. Back in the house, I put the keys back in their place next to Bernard's alarm clock and lay down beside him in the dark. But there was still something missing, something that would capture whatever happened in that bedroom the following day in a way that could not be denied, explained away, or reframed by a man who had spent 30 years learning exactly how to manage me. I needed to hear it, all of it, from their own mouths. Then I remembered Marcus's old voice recorder. He had used it in his first year of university to record lectures when the content moved faster than he could write. I had kept it in the small storage cupboard beside the bathroom where I kept the household things, batteries, spare bulbs, old cables, the accumulated practical debris of a long domestic life. Then I slipped out of bed, so carefully not to wake my snoring husband. I picked up my phone from the nightstand and turned the screen brightness all the way down and moved to the door. The hallway was dark. I went to the small storage cupboard and took it. It was small and flat and gray, the kind that clips to a pocket or sits on a desk without drawing attention. I turned it on quietly. The small green light came on. I checked the battery indicator. It was low. I went back to the storage cupboard and found the right size batteries and replaced them in the dark. It was working slowly and without sound. I clicked it on again. The green light held steady. I carried it to the bedroom doorway and stood for a moment thinking of where to place it. It needed to be somewhere that would capture sound from anywhere in the room without being visible at a glance. Somewhere I could cover it with something that belonged there, something whose presence would not register as unusual to a man who had never paid close attention to the details of the rooms he lived in. The bookshelf beside the headboard on Bernard's side of the bed. He kept books he never read there, a travel clock, a small framed photograph. The photograph was from Marcus and Sandra's wedding. The four of us standing in the garden, afternoon light, everyone smiling. I had put it there myself 2 years ago because it was a good photograph and that shelf needed something on it. I set the recorder on the shelf behind the frame, flush against the wall, the microphone facing out between the frame's edge and the shelf bracket where it was invisible unless you were specifically looking for it. I moved the frame slightly forward to close the gap and block the recorder from view. I stood back and looked. Just a bookshelf. Just a photograph. Nothing that would draw a second look from anyone. I pressed record. The tiny green light went dark, which was how I knew it was running. It only showed the light when idle or on standby. Recording, it went dark, silent and invisible. I stood in the bedroom doorway for a moment and looked at the shelf, and then at Bernard, still sleeping, his breathing slow and deep, the absolute peace of a man who has arranged his deception carefully and sleeps well inside it. I lay beside him and looked at the ceiling and felt the quiet, settled weight of everything that had been decided. The industrial glue had now been exchanged with their coitus glue. Somewhere across the city, Sandra was asleep too, with no awareness that the small imported tube she had chosen so carefully and brought so deliberately into my marriage was no longer what it had been. That the next time she reached for it, she would find something that could not be undone by an apology or a conversation or any of the ordinary human mechanisms of damage control. I smiled satisfyingly to myself. I closed my eyes, but I couldn't sleep. Although I had exchanged the glue, set up the recorder, yet something is still remaining to make my plan complete. I need to come up with a situation that will demand my absence from the house so that it can give Bernard the opportunity to bring Sandra over to our home whilst he think that I am away. I remembered that my widowed elder sister, who lived in Fort Lauderdale, had been sick. I had visited her twice, so I think using another visitation as an excuse would be perfect. But I also need an audience because, trust me, I am not ready to witness this alone. I want others to see the disgusting act my husband and daughter-in-law had gotten themselves into. I want Sandra's family to see how their daughter decided to deliberately marry my son just to date my husband. I want Bernard's family to see how cruel and heartless their brother and son could be. So I decided to use an invitation to a lunch in our home as a bait to bring them all to my place. I picked up my phone and began sending them invitation messages individually. It was more personal. I wrote to Patricia, who is Bernard's only sister. She had been kind to me from the beginning, the kind of sister-in-law who calls on birthdays and shows up when things are hard and means it both times. Patricia, I'm heading out of town for a day or two. My sister in Fort Lauderdale isn't feeling well, and I want to check on her. I've left things in the kitchen. Come by for lunch tomorrow around noon if you're free. I've invited a few family members, and it would be so nice to have everyone together. Marcus will be there. Just let yourself in. I waited, read it back, and send it. Then I sent the same message to Bernard's brother Robert. They were not close, but he was family and he lived nearby, and he showed up when things mattered. Then I moved to Sandra's family. This was the part that required the most care. Not because I was uncertain about it, but because I understood what it meant. These were Sandra's people. They were going to arrive at my house tomorrow, believing they were coming to a family lunch. They were going to leave knowing exactly what their daughter and sister had been doing in my marriage and in my home. I wrote to Helen, her mother. Helen, I hope you're well. I'm heading to see my sister for a couple of days, but I've asked a few people to come by the house tomorrow around noon for an informal lunch. I'd love it if you and Frank could come. It's been too long since we've all been together properly. Marcus will be there. Just come in. The door will be open for everyone. I sent the same message to Louise, her father, then to Diane, her sister, and Paul, her brother. Each one separate, each one warm, each one the kind of message a woman sends to family members she genuinely likes, with no urgency in it, no hint of anything unusual, just a lunch invitation from a woman who values her family and likes to bring people together. The last message was Marcus. I sat with the phone in my hands for a longer moment before I wrote this one. My son, who was going to drive to that house tomorrow expecting lunch, and his mother, and walk into something that was going to break something in him that would take years to fully repair. I could not protect him from it. The only thing I could do was make sure that when it broke cleanly, in the open, with the truth visible and undeniable, so that no version of events could be constructed around him that left him uncertain about what had happened or why. Marcus, my love, I'm heading to Fort Lauderdale to check on Ani. She's a bit under the weather, and I don't want her on her own. I've asked a few people to come by the house tomorrow for lunch, around noon. Spare key is on the hook by the door. Let yourself in and make yourself at home. I'll be back tomorrow evening, or possibly the day after, depending on how she is. I love you so much. Save me some food, if there's any left. I sent it. I put the phone face down on the counter. I have invited everyone to the lunch, but I still need to bring Bernard into this forbidden drama that's about to unfold. It's weekend, and he won't go to work except he had any lies to tell me to enable him sneak out of the house to see his mistress as usual. He came down at 7:40. He had already had his bath and got dressed. His hair still slightly damp. He sat at the table and reached for his coffee. I set eggs and toast in front of him and sat across from him, waiting for the right moment to tell him. Bernard, I said, calmly, I got a message from my sister last night after you were asleep. You know, she is not feeling well for the past 2 months and had since been on her own down in Fort Lauderdale. And I think I should go and check on her. He looked up from his plate. I watched him smile under his breath. Fort Lauderdale, he said, that's 3 hours' journey. About that. I'll leave this morning. I'm hoping to be back by this evening, but it might be tomorrow, depending on how she is. He reached across the table and put his hand over mine. I let him. I looked at his hand on mine and kept my face steady. Don't rush back, he said. She needs you. I'll take care of things here. I almost laughed out loud, but I held myself. I'll take care of things here. Indeed. Anyway, I am ready to see how he does that. I looked at him. I smiled. I said, thank you. He ate the rest of his breakfast quickly and said he had some things to sort out in his study upstairs. He kissed my cheek with the practiced warmth of a man whose conscience does not judge anymore for cheating on his wife. I watched him go upstairs and close the door of his study. I had expected this. I stood at the kitchen window for a moment. Then I went to the bedroom. I checked the recorder one final time. It was still running. I looked at the wedding photo. The 4 of us. Everyone smiling. I let myself look at it for exactly as long as I needed to. And then I turned away. I packed a bag. A proper bag. The kind you pack for an overnight away. A change of clothes, my toiletries, a book I would not read. I carried it to the front door and set it there. Then I sat on the sofa and waited. At 9:05, I picked up my bag, went to his study to inform him that I am leaving. He kissed me goodbye and assured me once again that he will take care of the house while I'm away. I nodded slightly and left, closing the door after me. I put the bag in the car, got in, and reversed out of the driveway. I drove to the end of the road. I turned the corner. I drove 1 street over and parked and sat in the car for 3 minutes. Then I got out, left the overnight bag in the boot, took only my handbag, and walked around the block to Dorothy's front door. She answered on the second knock. Dorothy was 71 years old and had lived across the street from me for 19 years. She was a beautiful woman with white hair and careful eyes and the particular unhurried quality of someone who has long since stopped being rattled by the unexpected. She looked at me on her doorstep. "Elizabeth," she said. "Dorothy." I paused. "I wonder if I could sit with you for a while. I want to watch my house from here. If that's all right." She looked at me for a moment. She looked across the street at my house. She looked back at me. "Come in," she said, and stepped aside. She did not ask why. She did not ask anything. She just poured me a cup of coffee and led me to the armchair by the front window that looked directly across the street at my front door. Then she sat in her own chair nearby and picked up the book she had apparently been reading when I knocked. I truly appreciate the dignity of silence she had offered me. I set up the app on my phone that connected to the recorder in the bedroom. One earbud in my left ear turned low. The audio came through immediately. The quiet sounds of my own house, empty and still. The refrigerator hum. The small ambient sounds of a building going about its morning. I wrapped both hands around the coffee mug and watched my front door. I did not have to wait very long. Before I saw a car turned into the road at exactly 10:31. The car was not Sandra's usual car. It was a different one, something smaller and darker, the kind of car you use when you don't want to be seen arriving. It parked 3 houses down from my own house. The door opened, and Sandra got out. She was dressed carefully, dark trousers, a soft blouse, her hair loose. She wore sunglasses despite the flat gray of the morning sky. She stood beside the car and looked up and down the street slowly and thoroughly, making sure no one was watching her. Then she walked to my front door and pressed the bell once, and Bernard opened the door within seconds. He looked left. He looked right. The same sweep she had just done. The two of them performing the same choreography from opposite sides of the door, mirror images of the same careful habit. He stepped back. She walked in and closed the door. Through my earbud, I heard Sandra's voice moving through my hallway as she said, "Finally, I am so tired of hotel rooms." Bernard laughed and said, "We have the whole day. She thinks she won't be back until tomorrow at the earliest." "Good," Sandra replied. I could hear the sound of her moving through my kitchen, opening the refrigerator. "There's not much food. We'll figure it out later." Their voices moving away from the kitchen, down the hall, toward the bedroom. I looked out of Dorothy's window at my front door. The street was ordinary and quiet. A woman walking a small dog on the opposite pavement. A delivery van moving slowly. The cat from the house, next door, sitting on the garden wall, utterly indifferent. Everything looked exactly like a regular morning in a regular street. The sounds that came through my earbud over the next minutes were the type that could break the heart of a woman. It was the sound of pleasure. I could hear Bernard's voice as he moans Sandra's name. I felt my heart shattered into 1,000 pieces. I moved the phone a little further along the armchair's arm and looked at the street and breathed carefully and held myself together with the same quiet, patient determination I had been using all week. I had done my crying privately, and I was not going to allow myself break down in another woman's house. Dorothy looked up from her book once. She looked at my face. She said nothing, but I could see through her face that she knew that anything that could make me sit in her house and spy my house must be very serious. In less than 10 seconds, I heard the quality of the sounds from the bedroom change from sweet moans to a painful moan. I heard Sandra say with a painful tone as panic crept in, "What is this, Bernard? Wait, something's wrong. I can't move. What did you do? What the hell did you put on me?" "I don't understand," Bernard replied. "It's the same stuff as always. The silver tube, the Chinese brand you like." But Sandra interrupted him almost immediately. "Something is wrong, Bernard. I can't move. It hurts so badly. We are stuck." Her voice is climbing now. The voice of a person who has just encountered something genuinely wrong with their body and cannot understand it. Bernard was still trying to stay in control. Okay, Okay, just stop moving, stop pulling. I'm not pulling, Sandra interrupted. I can't even move. It's painful. I could hear Bernard breathing hard. And trust me, this is the exact moment I had been waiting for. The sweet sound of two cheaters realizing that their night of passion had turned into a medical emergency. They tried everything. Water from the kitchen sink, soap from the bathroom, even what sounded like cooking oil. Nothing worked. We need help, Sandra said. I could sense the fear in her voice. Keep your voice down, Bernard said. There is no one to hear me. Bernard, she replied. Your wife is gone. We need a doctor. Then Bernard replied in a low, frightened voice. If we call anyone, we will be exposed. I know what it means if we call anyone, Sandra replied, but we have no other choice. After about 40 minutes of deliberation and increasingly desperate attempts to separate themselves, they finally admitted defeat. Then I heard Sandra made the call, giving my address to the emergency services dispatcher in a voice that shook on every third word, saying she needed an ambulance, saying there had been an accident, and begging them to come over immediately. I looked up from my phone and out through Dorothy's window at the street, at my house, at the front door that was still closed, that still looked like the front door of a house where nothing unusual was happening. Dorothy was watching me. I met her eyes. Dorothy, I said quietly, whatever happens over there in the next little while, I just want you to know that I've been aware of something for some time. She looked at me. She looked at my house. She looked back at me. She did not say anything. She just nodded once, slowly, the nod of a woman who is recalibrating everything she thought she knew about the morning she is currently in the middle of. At 11:58, Marcus's name appeared on my phone screen. We're on our way, Mom. David's with me. I typed back. The spare key is on the hook, sweetheart. Let yourself in. I might be a little late getting back. I watched his message sit on the screen for a moment. My son is driving toward that house with his cousin, expecting lunch and his mother and the comfortable, ordinary warmth of a Saturday spent with his family. I thought about how he would feel after witnessing this. I thought about what it was going to look like in about 20 minutes. I felt bad, but my son deserves the truth. At 12:04, Marcus's truck appeared at the end of the road. I watched it slow and park. I watched my son get out, tall and unhurried, his cousin David behind him, and walk up the path to my front door with his key already out the way. He always arrived, a little early, ready to help, assuming warmth and food, and his mother's voice from the kitchen. He let himself in. The door closed behind them. Through the earbud, I could hear him move around the house and chatting with David. I heard his footsteps cross the hallway. His cousin followed behind. The bedroom door was closed. He moved to the door and stopped. The house was quiet enough, making it easier to hear frightened sounds of two people in a situation they cannot resolve. Hello? Is anyone here? His voice was aimed toward the bedroom door. There was total silence from inside the room. The silence of two people who have just heard a voice that should not exist in this house right now and have gone completely still. Marcus knocked twice. It was obvious that he had decided he was going to know what was on the other side of the door, regardless of what it took. I heard Bernard's voice as he said in a frightened tone, Marcus, just give us a moment. Dad. Marcus called out. My son's voice landed the way a stone lands in still water, the impact first, and then the rings spreading out from it in every direction. Then the door opened. I know the silence that followed. I counted it. For seconds. For full seconds, in which my son stood in the doorway of his parents' bedroom and looked at what was in front of him and did not speak and did not move. Then I heard his voice, very quiet, very controlled, the voice of a man holding something enormous with both hands. What is this? What's going on here? Sandra's replied already, crying, Marcus, please just listen. What is happening here? Marcus asked again, his voice rising. Then I heard Bernard's voice. Son, please calm down. I cannot move. Something is really wrong. I need help. Please, I need a doctor. I heard Marcus's footsteps leaving the bedroom, his cousin following behind. Within 2 minutes, messages began arriving on the family thread. Patricia texted that she just parked and she is coming in now. Robert texted that he was 2 minutes away, and Sandra's mother Helen sent me a message asking where to park their car. In fact, everyone I had invited arrived almost at once. I watched them from the window. Patricia is going in through the front door, Robert's car pulling up, and then Sandra's family, Helen and Frank getting out of their car, Helen with something in her hand, Frank with his hand at the small of her back the way husbands walk their wives toward pleasant things. Diane behind them, Paul from further up the road. All of them are walking toward my front door. All of them believing they were coming to lunch. Then I saw the ambulance coming directly towards my house. 2 paramedics got out with the brisk efficiency of professionals who understood the importance of urgency. They went in through the front door. Patricia was on the front step and moved aside. The paramedics went down the hall, the bedroom door, and then one of them came back out to the hallway significantly faster than he had gone in and whispered something to his colleague. His colleague went in. There was a short exchange of whispers, and you could tell by their composure that they had never encountered anything like this in their years of practice. By this time, the street was gathering. Neighbors had heard the siren and come to doors and gates the way neighbors do, drawn by the sound and the lights and the pull of something unusual happening on an ordinary street. Mrs. Hargreaves from 2 doors down, the couple from across the road. Mr. Alex from the corner was standing at his gate with his arms folded. Others I recognized, less well, faces I knew from years of living here without knowing names. Some people were recording. Everybody wants to be the first to carry the news. Even Dorothy excused herself and went outside to record the full picture of what was unfolding. The paramedics came out. They had covered Bernard and Sandra as thoroughly as the situation allowed. But there is no way to bring 2 people out of a house on a stretcher, because they could not be separated without every person standing on that path and that pavement understanding immediately and completely what they were looking at. The street went very quiet as they absorbed what had happened. After Bernard and Sandra were put in the ambulance, they took off to the hospital. The street stood in the silence as people continued to murmur to each other as they dispersed to their various homes with the particular subdued energy of people who have witnessed something humiliating. I got up from Dorothy's armchair, picked up my handbag, opened the door, and walked out. I crossed the street. I walked toward my house like a confused woman who had just received a call that something was wrong, but did not know how bad it is, or what she was about to walk into. Helen looked up and saw me. The expression on her face in that moment is one I will carry for the rest of my life. It was not guilt. She had nothing to be guilty for. It was devastation. And it was shame, not her shame, but the shame of proximity of having given a child to the world and had that child choose to be what Sandra had chosen to be. She looked at me with the full weight of a mother whose child had ruined her family's name and made her small instead of proud. She opened her mouth to speak, but no single word came out. I looked back at her. I did not speak either. I just walked up my own path to my own front door. Marcus was there. He was standing in the doorway with his arms at his sides. I could see pain, sadness, and disappointment written all over his face. He watched me come up the path. And when I reached him, he looked at me for a long moment. I looked back at my son. "You knew?" he asked. I looked at him and nodded slightly. I reached up and put my hand against the side of his face. He closed his eyes, just for a moment. Then he opened them and stepped aside and let me into my own house. I walked through my front door. I stood in my hallway. The recorder was still running in the bedroom behind the photograph frame, capturing the silence of a room that was now empty, the silence that follows the end of something that should never have begun. I stood in the doorway with pain tearing through my heart. Marcus came and stood beside me. We stood there together in the doorway of the house where he had grown up, where his childhood memories were formed, where he had happily told me about his love for Sandra, and where his dad and Sandra chose to betray him. Dorothy came to my house and gave me a reassuring look, the look that says you are stronger than you think. I decided to go to the hospital with Dorothy, while Marcus, my son, stayed back at home. Dorothy drove carefully. I sat in the passenger seat with my handbag in my lap and watched the streets move past the window. My handbag felt heavier than usual. I had packed it carefully that morning before I left the house. That morning, inside my bag were 2 tubes of capsaicin cream, the kind used for severe muscle and joint pain that feels hot when it touches the skin. I had bought them 2 days ago from a pharmacy 2 towns over, paid cash, and I had carried them with me every day, without Bernard ever knowing they were there. When we reached the hospital, Dorothy parked the car in the hospital's lot, and we walked through the automatic doors together, took the lift to the 3rd floor, and found the corridor. We sat down in 2 plastic chairs against the wall. My composure was that of a distressed wife who had driven back from Fort Lauderdale after an alarming phone call and did not yet fully understand what had happened in her own home. The hospital was busy, as usual, nurses attending to patients, families in various states of waiting, each carrying their own version of fear or hope or the exhausted suspension between the two. At some point, a woman 2 chairs down looked at her phone, and then looked at me, and then looked at her phone again. Then she said to my hearing, "That's the wife to the man who was stuck on his daughter-in-law." Poor woman. I didn't say a word. I already knew that people would share the video because it confirms something they already believed about the world, that deception has consequences, that the truth arrives eventually, and that justice sometimes looks exactly like what everyone privately hoped it would look like. I sat with my hands on my handbag and waited. At 4:17, a nurse called us to see the doctor in his office. The doctor was already seated when we came in. He was a compact man in his 50s with efficient movements and the particular manner of a professional who delivers difficult news regularly enough to have developed a reliable method for it. We sat down across from him, and he introduced himself as Dr. Osei. He leaned forward slightly and said, "Mrs. Crawford, I want to give you an update. We have successfully completed the separation procedure. The bond has been fully released, and both patients are stable." He paused in the careful way of a man who has more to say. "There is skin irritation and some surface tissue damage from the separation itself, which is to be expected given the nature of the bonding agent involved. We're going to treat that with a topical ointment, standard recovery protocol for this type of injury. With proper care and rest, the surface damage should resolve." I nodded slowly, the nod of a relieved wife. "Can I see them?" I asked. My voice was quiet and slightly unsteady in exactly the right way. He nodded. "Of course. Give us a few minutes to get them settled, and a nurse will take you through." He stood, looked at me, with the brief, practiced compassion of a man who has delivered this kind of news to families before, and knows there is no version of it that lands easily. "I'm sorry you're going through this, Mrs. Crawford." "Thank you," I said. "Thank you for everything." Dorothy and I went back to the waiting room without saying a word to each other. I sat with my hands on my handbag and felt the weight of the 2 tubes at the bottom of it and breathed steadily and waited. A few minutes later, a young nurse appeared. She was perhaps 25, with kind eyes and the slightly careful manner of someone who has been briefed on the situation and is trying to navigate it with appropriate sensitivity. She led me to the nurse's station, a long counter with a computer and trays of supplies and the organized functional clutter of a ward in constant operation. And she reached behind the counter and produced 2 tubes of ointment, white with blue lettering, medical-grade skin, recovery cream. She set them on the counter in front of me. "These are for both patients," she said gently. "Just apply a small amount to the affected areas. It will help with the inflammation and support the healing process." She looked at me with eyes full of a compassion that was entirely genuine and entirely uninformed. "Mrs. Crawford, I just want to say I'm so sorry. This is an incredibly difficult situation, and you are handling it with so much dignity." I looked at her. I gave her the small, grateful, slightly pained smile of a woman who is just barely holding herself together. "Thank you," I said softly. "That means a great deal." She smiled back and turned to attend to something on the computer behind her. Without hesitation, I slid my right hand into my handbag, brought the capsaicin tubes that I brought, and methodically exchanged it with ointment tubes. The nurse turned back around. "All set?" she asked. "Yes," I replied. "Thank you." She led me down the corridor to the room. She opened the door, and I went in, and she closed it softly behind me. The room was small and white. It smelled of antiseptic and the particular flat stillness of a space where two people who planned to have fun with each other encountered excruciating pain. Instead, there were two beds. Sandra lay on the bed nearest to the window, her hair tangled, her face carrying the specific, exhausted blankness of someone who has spent the last several hours being managed by medical professionals and is now simply lying in the aftermath of it. She was looking at the ceiling when I came in. She heard the door. She turned her head and looked at me. I looked back at her. She held my gaze for perhaps 2 seconds and then looked away, back at the ceiling, her jaw tightening slightly, her hands flat on the blanket at her sides. Bernard was in the other bed, pale in the way that anesthetics leave people pale, a flatness to the skin, a slight wateriness to the eyes, and the depleted look of a body that has been through something and is not yet fully back from it. He looked at me, and I could see shame written all over his face. "Elizabeth," he called out. His voice was low and rough. I did not respond. I walked to the space between the two beds, and I reached into my jacket pocket and took out the 2 capsaicin tubes, and I set one on the table beside Bernard's bed, and one on the table beside Sandra's bed, and I arranged them with the same care I brought to everything. Labels facing out, caps on, placed where they could easily be reached. Bernard looked at the tube beside him, then at me. "Elizabeth, please, just let me explain." The nurse said to apply a small amount to the affected areas. I said pleasantly, "It will help with the inflammation." I picked up my handbag from where I had set it at the foot of the bed and walked out of the door. I opened the door and walked out and closed it behind me. I had been back in my chair in the corridor for perhaps 6 minutes when I heard a loud cry. It was from Bernard and Sandra's room. I knew instantly that they had applied the cream. The concerned wife had brought it, neither of them thinking twice about it, because why would they? It was a tube. It came from a nurse's station. It had been handed to a wife, and it was exactly what it appeared to be. Sandra's voice was sharper and high. "What is this? It burns. My body is on fire." Then Bernard, lower, rougher, a sound that was pure reaction, the sound a person makes when pain arrives before the mind has caught up with what is causing it. "What the hell? Get someone, get a nurse." Dorothy looked at the closed door and looked at me. I was looking at the wall in front of me. My hands were folded on my handbag. My face was the face of a woman sitting in a hospital corridor who has just heard a disturbance from the room her husband is in and is trying to determine whether she should be alarmed. The door burst open. Sandra's voice is pouring into the corridor now, full and uncontained. "It's burning. My skin is on fire. Someone help." A nurse ran past me. Then another. Then Dr. Osei moved fast, his earlier composure replaced by the sharp, purposeful urgency of a medical professional responding to something he had not anticipated. He went through the door. The door closed. Through it, muffled but audible, the sounds of medical intervention, voices, movement, and the particular controlled chaos of a medical team managing a situation that has just changed. Doors opened along the corridor. Other patients looking out. A family from the waiting area at the far end stood up and craned toward the noise. An elderly man in a dressing gown stood in his doorway with an expression of mildly alarmed curiosity. A woman further down had her phone out, filming the closed door and the running nurses with the automatic instinct of someone who has spent enough time on the internet to know that this kind of moment is the kind of moment that gets recorded. An older woman sitting 3 chairs from Dorothy leaned toward her husband and said, in a voice she probably believed was quieter than it was, "It's them, from the video. The father-in-law and the daughter-in-law. I saw it this morning." Her husband looked at the closed door, then at me, then quickly away. Dorothy sat beside me and said nothing and did nothing except remain exactly where she was, which was what I needed from her, and which she had been providing all day without being asked. The corridor settled into a new kind of waiting, the charged, whispering, phone-lit waiting of people who know something significant is happening behind a closed door and are alert to every sound that comes through it. I sat with my hands folded and waited. Dr. Osei came out 40 minutes later. He walked toward me, and his face was different from the face he had worn when he came out the first time. The first time his face had been the face of a doctor delivering a manageable update. This face was the face of a man who has encountered something in the course of an ordinary shift that was not ordinary, something that has required him to recalibrate his understanding of what the evening was going to contain. He sat down. He did not lean forward this time. He sat upright, his hands on his knees, and he looked at me with the careful, measuring look of a doctor who is assembling a picture and has not yet finished assembling it. "Mrs. Crawford," he said, "I need to update you on a development." I looked at him with the appropriate expression. When I examined both patients just now, I found that the skin irritation, which I had assessed as surface level following the separation, has been significantly compounded. There appears to have been a chemical irritant applied to the affected areas, something with a significant capsaicin concentration, and the interaction between that irritant and the already damaged tissue has created a severe inflammatory response. He paused. "I want to be very direct with you. The damage I am now looking at is considerably more serious than what we were managing an hour ago." I nodded slowly. The tissue that was already stressed from the separation procedure has been deeply compromised by the chemical burn. We are now looking at a real and immediate risk of necrosis, tissue death, if we do not intervene surgically. The capsaicin has penetrated into tissue that was already vulnerable, and the inflammatory cascade that has begun will, if left untreated, cause irreversible damage. He looked at me steadily. "I am recommending emergency surgery. Mrs. Crawford, we need to go in and remove the affected tissue before that window closes." "I understand," I said. My voice was even and clear. "Whatever you need to do." He looked at me for a moment, that reading look again, longer this time, more searching. Whatever he was looking for in my face, or whatever he found there, he kept to himself. He was a doctor. His job was the medicine. "We'll move quickly," he said. "I'll have someone update you as soon as we're through." The surgery took 3 hours and 21 minutes. Marcus arrived during the first hour. I had called him while waiting for the surgery to be completed so that I could finish my mission before finally leaving. I told him, "Go to my bedroom dresser, bottom drawer, behind the winter scarves, and bring me the brown envelope sealed with tape." He did not ask what was in it. He just said he would bring it. That was Marcus. Always the son who showed up and asked questions later, who trusted that if his mother was asking for something, there was a reason worth trusting. He came down the corridor with the envelope under his arm, and he sat beside me in that corridor through 3 hours and 21 minutes of surgery. A nurse brought me a cup of tea at some point. It was too sweet, and I drank it anyway. At 6:15 p.m., Dr. Osei came back through the double doors. He walked toward us, and I watched his face from the moment he appeared, and his face told me what I needed to know before he opened his mouth. It was the grave face, the face of a professional who has done everything available to him and is now delivering the honest account of what that amounted to, and the honest account is not the one he would have chosen to deliver. He asked us to join him in his office, and we did. After we are all seated, he said, "The surgery is complete. Both patients are stable and in recovery." He paused, and in the pause was the weight of everything that followed it. "I have to be very direct with you, Mrs. Crawford. The extent of the tissue excision required was significantly more than we anticipated when we went in. The damage, the combination of the original separation trauma and the chemical burn, had penetrated more deeply and spread more widely than our pre-surgical imaging fully captured. We removed everything that needed to come out. The immediate risk of necrosis has been addressed, but the functional changes resulting from the extent of the excision will be permanent. I want you to understand what that means. What has been removed cannot be restored or regenerated. Your husband will recover. He will heal from the surgery itself, but his functional capacity in the affected area has been permanently and significantly altered. Permanent. The word rang in my head like a bell. I held Dr. Osei's gaze with the composed, absorbing attention of a wife receiving news about her husband. "Thank you," I said. "Thank you for being honest with me." He looked at me for a long moment, the searching look, longer than before. Then he told me they would be moved to a recovery room shortly, and a nurse would let me know when I could go in. Dorothy looked straight ahead. Marcus sat with the envelope on his knees and was very still. I sat with my hands folded on my handbag, and looked at the wall. I thought over the effect of what happened to my husband and my daughter-in-law. I had not set out to cause permanent damage. I had set out to act. I had set out to stop being the woman who was managed and trusted and deceived, and to become instead the woman who saw clearly and moved accordingly. The consequences of acting are not always the consequences you precisely intended. And I understood that. Bernard had slept with Sandra, our daughter-in-law, without a care. He had brought her into our home for our son to marry her, to make their affair seamless. Sandra had agreed, without a care. They had looked at my life and the life of my son and decided that our emotions don't matter as long as they get what they want. The consequences of their actions were theirs to bear. I was not moved. Let them face the consequences of their actions. Marcus, I said quietly, give me the envelope. He looked at it, then at me, the look of a son who understands what his mother is about to do and has made his own peace with it. Not easily, not without cost, but completely. He handed me the envelope without a word. I stood up, straightened my jacket, picked up my handbag, and walked to the room. The recovery room was quieter than the ward, dimmer, the particular hush of a space where people are being brought back from anesthesia, where the body is doing the slow work of returning to itself from somewhere far under. 2 beds. Sandra was nearest the door this time, her eyes closed, her breathing shallow and even. Bernard was in the far bed, his eyes open, fixed on the ceiling until the door opened, and then fixed on me. I walked to the space between the 2 beds. I opened the envelope. I laid everything on the table where both of them could see it. The photographs, the video, the audio transcripts, every piece of evidence of everything Thomas had gathered, everything I had gathered, and every piece of the truth that I had assembled over the past weeks. I set the 2 divorce papers on top, one facing Bernard, one facing Sandra, a pen on each. I looked at my husband. Here, sign this, Bernard, I said. My voice was quiet and even and left no room for anything on the other side of it. Sign them, and then do whatever you want. But you are done with my son's life and mine. Sandra's eyes had opened. She was looking at the papers on the table with the expression of a woman who has been through surgery and pain and public humiliation and the collapse of everything she built, and is now looking at the last of it arriving in the form of 2 legal documents and a pen. She turned her head toward the door. Marcus! Her voice was broken and very small. Please, I know you're there. Please come in. Please just listen to me. I made a mistake. I know what I did. Please, I'm begging you, please don't leave. The door did not open. The corridor beyond it was silent with the specific silence of a man who has heard every word and has chosen, with everything he has, not to answer. Not because he did not hear, because he had heard everything, all of it, and his silence was not an absence but a decision. Sandra closed her eyes. 2 tears ran sideways from the corners of them into her hair. She did not speak again. Bernard reached for my hand. I moved it away. Elizabeth. His voice was low and fractured, the voice of a man who has lost the tools he relied on and is speaking without them for perhaps the first time. I need you to know that I am sorry. No, I interrupted him. Please just listen to me, he said. No, Bernard, I said firmly. He looked at me. The last look, the look of a man who understands, finally and completely, that there is no version of this conversation that ends differently from how it is going to end, that the woman standing beside his hospital bed is not the manageable and trusting wife he believed he knew, that she has not been that woman for some days now, and perhaps, in the ways that mattered, was never entirely that woman at all. We've been married for 35 years, he said, as if it were an argument. Yes, I said, 35 years, and all I got from you is betrayal. I picked up my handbag and walked out of the door without looking back. Marcus was in the corridor. He was leaning against the wall, his head back, his eyes closed. He heard the door and opened it and looked at me, and I looked at him, and neither of us said anything for a moment. Then from inside the room, very faintly, Bernard's voice sang something, the words indistinct, and a nurse's voice responding. Sir, please, this is a recovery ward. You need to keep your voice down. I didn't say a word, not turn back to the room. I am done with him, and there is no going back. I walked to Marcus, my son. I put my hand on his shoulder. He did not look up immediately. I felt him breathe one long, unsteady breath, the kind that carries more than air, the kind that has been waiting to be released since the moment he turned that bedroom door handle and found out that his father and wife were having an affair. I stood beside him and held him reassuringly. Then he lifted his face. His eyes were dry. Marcus had always been like me in that way, the grief going inward first, taking up residence somewhere deep before it ever found the surface. But the thing in his eyes in that corridor was not something I had ever seen there before. Not shock anymore. Something older and heavier than shock. The particular wound of a man who has been betrayed by the two people whose loyalty he had never thought to question, and who is now standing in the rubble of that trust, trying to understand the shape of the world without it. Mom, he said. His voice was very quiet. Why did it have to be Dad? Why her? I looked at my son. I did not answer. There was no answer to that question that would have helped him. Some questions are not asked because the person asking them wants an answer. They are asked because the pain they feel needs somewhere to go, needs to be spoken out loud in the presence of someone who will receive it without trying to fix it or explain it away. I put my arms around him in a tight hug. I let him pour his pain he felt on my shoulder, and that was the most honest thing that happened on that entire day. We left the hospital and drove back home. I looked out the window at the passing streets and felt the particular stillness of a woman who has done what she needed to do and is now, for the first time in a very long time, simply moving forward. Not healed, no, but moving forward and leaving her past behind. 4 days later, Marcus moved in with me. He came on a Sunday morning with one suitcase and a box of books and the careful, slightly uncertain manner of a grown man returning to his childhood home under circumstances none of us had planned for. I had made the guest room ready. I provided fresh sheets, good towels, and the small lamp from the sitting room on the bedside table because the overhead light in that room had always been too harsh and I had never gotten around to replacing the bulb, and this seemed like the moment to finally do something about it. He set his suitcase at the foot of the bed and looked around the room. Then he looked at me and said, "Please, Mom, let me stay, just for a while, until I put myself together." "You can stay as long as you need," I said. He nodded. He sat on the edge of the bed and put his hands on his knees and looked at the floor for a moment. "I keep thinking," he said slowly, "that I should have known, that there must have been signs, that if I had been paying more attention, I would have found out." "No," I said. He looked up. "No," I said again, more quietly. "They were very careful, both of them, for a very long time. You did not miss something that was visible. You trusted people who had decided to be trustworthy in your presence, and something else entirely when you were not looking. That is not your failure. That is theirs." He held my gaze for a long moment. Then he looked back at the floor. "I know," he said, "but I don't think I can ever trust anyone again." He paused and looked at my face for a few seconds. Then he added, "Except you, Mom. Thank you for watching my back." "It's okay, son," I replied, paying him back. "Please get some rest." I left him to unpack. I went to the kitchen and made dinner, rice and chicken, and the green salad. We ate together that evening at the kitchen table. We did not talk much. The table between us and the food and the ordinary sounds of a shared meal were enough. The particular comfort of two people who belong to each other eating together in a warm kitchen, which is one of the most human things there is, and which I had been doing alone for too many evenings to count. After dinner, Marcus washed the dishes without being asked. I dried them and put them away, and we worked alongside each other in the kitchen in a companionable quiet that felt, unexpectedly and gently, like something being repaired. The weeks that followed were not easy. I will not pretend they were. There were mornings when I woke before 5 and lay in the dark and felt the full weight of 35 years of betrayal rest on my chest. Marcus had his own version of the early mornings. I could hear him sometimes, the light under his door at 3 or 4 in the morning, the occasional quiet sound of movement, a man lying awake with his own version of the wait. We did not discuss these nights directly. We simply acknowledged each other in the mornings with the silent recognition of two people who have both been somewhere difficult overnight and have both individually found their way back to the kitchen and the coffee and the beginning of another day. He came to the catering kitchen with me 3 weeks after he moved in. He had taken leave from his own work, administrative leave. He called it the kind of leave that a man takes when he needs time to reassemble himself before he can be reliable for other people again. We built a routine. Mornings at the kitchen, he handled the accounts and the client calls and the supplier negotiations while I ran the actual production, the menus, the staffing, the events, and the work of the thing. We were good at it together in a way that surprised me slightly, though perhaps it should not have. He had grown up watching me build this business. He knew its shape from the inside, even though he had never worked in it before. He helped me negotiate contracts at a better rate than I would have gotten them sometimes. And within 2 months, he had worked through every major account and improved the terms on 4 of them. He set up a proper invoicing system to replace the spreadsheet I had been using since the beginning. He hired a part-time bookkeeper. He told me one morning that the business had been undervalued for years and that under proper management, it was worth considerably more than I had ever treated it as being worth. I stood at the prep counter listening to him and felt a sense of satisfaction. On the other hand, people were kind to me in the way that people are kind when they believe you have been wronged and handled it with dignity. Customers at the catering kitchen said things. Neighbors said things. Women I barely knew stopped me in the street to say things. "You are so strong, Elizabeth. The whole neighborhood is proud of you. You held your head up through all of it." I thanked them. But I also carried something that none of them could see, the knowledge that strength is not what it looks like from the outside, that what they were calling strength was simply the thing you do when you have no other option, when the alternative to standing upright is falling, and falling is not available to you because you have a son who needs you to remain strong for them. Dorothy and I sometimes walked in the evenings around the park, near our road in the particular quiet of streets, after dinner when the day was done and the dark was coming and the world had a different quality to it. She told me once on one of these walks that people were still talking about it, that the consensus in the neighborhood was that I had come out of it with my dignity intact. "They say you won," she said. I walked beside her for a moment. "Maybe," I said, "but the price was a family. You don't win that exchange. You just survive it." She nodded and did not try to reframe it or soften it, which was why I liked her. I started going to church on Sunday mornings, not because I had a sudden uncomplicated faith or because I needed an institution to tell me how to process what had happened, but because there was something in sitting in that quiet space, in the particular stillness of a building that has been holding people's grief and hope for a long time. That gave me somewhere to put the things I was still carrying that had no other obvious home. I sat in the light from the stained glass windows, and I did not pray for Bernard or for Sandra. I prayed for Marcus. I prayed for myself. I prayed for the patience to let healing take the time that healing takes without trying to rush it or manage it or perform it for anyone's benefit, including my own. Trust me, it helped. My catering business continued growing with the help of my son. I looked around the kitchen at the prep counters and the ovens and the shelves and the equipment that represented 12 years of decisions and effort and stubbornness and love. I thought about the woman who had started this business in a rented kitchen with 2 part-time staff and a single hotel account. I thought about everything she had built since then and everything that had been threatened and everything that remained. I thought about Bernard. I did not think about him with anger anymore. The anger had burned itself out months ago, the way fires do when there is nothing left for them to consume. I thought about him with something quieter and more complicated, the sadness of a woman who had loved someone genuinely and been deceived completely, who had given 30 years to a life that had been something other than she believed, and who had survived it and continued and was still on a quiet afternoon in her own kitchen, fundamentally herself. Our divorce had been finalized, and that is all that mattered to me. My son was free his wife's betrayal too. I thought about Sandra, about Helen's face in the garden, about the price her family had paid for choices that were not theirs. I thought about Marcus in the office down the hall. I thought about what we had built together in these past months, not what we had lost, but what we had built. The mornings, the accounts, the renegotiated contracts, the pasta dinners, and the lemon tart, and the laugh that had lasted only a moment, but had been real. The slow, unglamorous, deeply human work of two people picking up broken pieces and figuring out, piece by piece, what can be reassembled and what needs to be left behind, and what new thing might be made from what remains. That work was not finished. It would not be finished for a long time, but it was underway, and it was real, and it was ours. I got up. I turned off the kitchen light. I walked down the hall to the office. Marcus looked up from the desk. "Are you ready?" he asked. "Yes, son," I replied. We locked up the kitchen together and walked out into the evening, my son and I, into the ordinary air of an ordinary street at the end of an ordinary working day. And we walked to the car side by side. And I thought, this is what remains. Me and my son. The genuine love we share is what they could not take. And it was enough. It was more than enough. It was everything. If this story found you, I hope it left you with something worth keeping. Betrayal is one of the heaviest things a person can carry, but I have learned that what survives betrayal, what you find on the other side of it when you have done the hard and honest work of walking through it, is often more real and more yours than what came before. Not because the pain was worth it. Pain is never simply worth it, but because you discover in the walking through exactly how much of yourself was never dependent on the person who deceived you. That part was always yours. It always will be. Thank you so much for staying with me through this story. If it moved you, if it made you feel seen, if any part of it felt like something you needed to hear, please leave me a comment below and tell me where in the world you are watching from. Every single one. I want to know how far this has traveled. If you are new here, please subscribe. There are more stories on this channel, stories about loss and courage, and the quiet strength of ordinary people navigating extraordinary things. Every story is told with love. And if you would like to support this channel so that I can keep bringing you stories like this one, you can send a super thanks. Every contribution means more than I can say and goes directly toward making the next story possible. I will see you in the next one. I love you all.